Now, for our main topic here on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to do the twofer again. We are going to talk about the 2024 5E rules in our mini review, and then we will get to more regions from Greyhawk as detailed in the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. Last week we talked about conditions.
Oh, yeah.
And Tom Dunn, our most favorite people who put things in spreadsheets and seem very, very smart, did an analysis of the relative value of each condition for 2014. So he notes that the 2014 stun condition is worth significantly more than the average damage per round of a typical player character. It's an awesome read that Tom has put up on GitHub, and we have a link in our show notes where he gives values for those conditions.
That's neat.
And
he numerically kind of ranks everything, and plus and minus, and how does it compare to advantage and disadvantage, and it's really kind of fascinating. But yeah, I mean, it does show that it's hard to balance these out, which is one of the things we talked about on the show.
And I think it's well known that Wizards of the Coast does the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. When they are saying how strong a monster is, they will look at the damage and look at the number of attacks and look at the armor class and look at the hit points, but they also look at the conditions that a monster might apply, set a value to those, and make that part of the balance of monster math. So it would be interesting to see how their math compared to Tom's, but we don't know theirs, so we can't do that. So this week, as I mentioned in our previous segment, we are going to talk about natural healing, short rests, and long rests, what they mean to the game, what they were in 2014, and what they have become in 2024. And so what is the design goal? What's the design goal of natural healing and long rests and short rests? And I will ask that age-old question, is D&D a resource management game?
A little bit.
And I get lots of different feedback on this. The only answer I will not accept is no. Because even if you only talk about hit points as resources, they are a resource that needs to be managed. Because if you fail to manage those hit points, then your character will likely die. So at least hit points are a resource management part of D&D, have been for a long time. And then the next question is, what are some of the other resources in the game? And are those part of a resource management game? The designers of no edition of D&D have really ever qualified or quantified that answer of how much of a resource management game is it. So what we have to do then is we have to go back and look at the game over the years to see what are some of the resources and how have they been manipulated, specifically hit points and specifically healing without magic.
Yeah. And I want to add something to this, Shawn, that goes back to those design goals, right? So absolutely, design goal is around this resource management and particularly hit points, but also its cadence of play. And this has been a critical thing for players, for GMs, and for designers, right? We heard a lot of discussion about this in 3rd edition and 4th edition, right? If you are you going to stop and rest and buff up and heal and all these things right before you open the door? Every door, right? Are you going to save certain things for the big boss fight, right? Are you going to have one fight, sleep, go to your next fight every time, right? Or do you feel you can play forever, right? Are you going to try to go to the dungeon, not even get there and have to go back and rest, right? Those kinds of questions, that cadence of play is super critical to how enjoyable the experience is and even what kind of experience it is.
it's less for me about how enjoyable it is, and then, like you say, what kind of
Yeah.
experience it is.
Yeah.
Because if you have a game where you cannot get back all of your hit points or all of your other resources unless you take a long rest, and you can only heal 1 hit point per night while you rest, there are certain kinds of stories that become more powerful.
Yeah.
And there are
Yeah.
certain kinds of stories that become very, very hard to tell because of those rules. So the game dictates through its rules the kinds of stories and the kinds of, as you said, cadence that the stories are expected to take.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at rest rules and hit point rules, recovery rules of previous editions to sort of illustrate this. AD&D First Edition tells us there are numerous ways to restore lost hit points. The most mundane is by resting and allowing time to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
For each day of rest, 1 hit point of damage is restored. After 30 days of game time have passed, hit points accrue at the rate of 5 per day thereafter. Paladins laying on hands, spells, potions, and other magical devices can more quickly restore lost hit points. A wish spell can be used to restore all lost hit points to several characters all at once. Hit points can never exceed the total rolled for the character plus bonuses. So, in other
And
words, you can't go above your maximum.
if you're if you lived through this, you may recall that going back to rest was weeks.
Mhm.
It was at
Yeah.
least a week. Because even spell slot, the other thing is that there were fewer spell slots and the number of them that could be used
Yeah.
for healing spells. And so what would, even if you had a cleric in the party, you needed many days for all those spells to be cast and rehealed once per
Yeah.
day to allow you to get back onto it, and of course then get all their spells back that they wanted to adventure with, so you could head out.
Mhm.
And so even with a spellcaster or two in the party, you could be looking at a week or more to rest before you could get out there, and that
Right.
was a very different cadence of play, right?
Yeah. And that's why the adventures for those earliest first edition AD&D things were not event driven,
Mm-hmm.
because if you had to rest for a week, the
Yeah.
events have already passed. So
Yeah.
everything was site based. It was you go to
Yeah.
the dungeon. Now, what was event based was if the characters leave after X
Right.
number of days, monsters return and
Yeah.
replenish in the dungeon.
Yeah.
But there was no, and then, 3 days later, the messenger comes and says that the dragon has burned this town. The published adventures did not have a lot of that.
Right.
Your
Yeah.
DM made
Your
homebrew
DM made.
stuff might. Yeah.
And your players would do things like layman's spells, the rope
Yeah.
trick, right? Those were critical to just like vanish so
Yeah.
that the dungeon dwellers looking for you while you need a whole week to heal on level 2 might not find you, right? And also
Yeah.
design wise, there were often things like a weird grotto that none of the goblins would go into. And well, you clear that grotto out and you hide there as long as you can, right?
Yep. Yep. So it was definitely a different cadence, definitely a different style of play than a lot of the play we see
And
today.
I'll just say real fast one last thing, which is that it's so interesting to me often when I look at old school type games, they do not return
Yep.
to this, right? They
Right.
all
Right.
kind of seem to agree, yeah, no, you heal overnight or much more easily.
Right. Yeah. I was about to say the exact same thing. Or if you do see these rules, it's for a very specific kind of play
Yeah.
that is
Yes.
hopefully spelled out clearly
Hmm.
at the start of the adventure, at the start of the rules, that this is a different thing than the role-playing games you see now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go from AD&D first edition to 3.5 edition D&D. Surely by that point you were healing overnight, right?
I mean,
With a full day's rest of 8 hours, you recover hit points equal to twice your character level. So at first level, overnight, you heal 2 hit points. If you have a complete day and night of bed rest, you can recover twice that. So
Yeah.
your normal, let's camp for 8 hours, first level, 2 hit points. Second level, or full day overnight plus full bed rest, 4 hit points at first level.
Gosh, I
Uh,
didn't remember that at all. That's really funny.
exactly.
You did this research, and thank you.
Yeah.
And probably because what we did was we
Hmm.
wanded it all away, right? A
Yes.
wand of cure light wounds. There were magic item crafting things. It wasn't particularly hard to get to the level where you could craft this thing. And once you
Mhm.
could, you would just take a wand of cure light wounds with full charges and slowly burn through that, healing
Mhm.
each other until you were ready to go the next day, if not even right then
Yeah.
and there.
Right then and there. And as Teos said, there were rules for crafting, and it was not difficult to make.
Hmm.
So the way to get around this and not have a slow, oh, we have to wait a week, was to use this rule to
Yeah.
make the happy stick. Just
Yeah.
boom, 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 boom,
Happy
boom, boom, boom,
stick.
boom. 50 charges of cure light wounds
Hmm.
can do 50 D8 or whatever it was, plus 50 points of healing all at once. And then you just throw the used stick away. Well, we'll make a new one tomorrow.
Hmm.
All right. So we got through third edition. We hadn't learned our lesson yet. So fourth edition said for an extended rest of at least 6 hours, you and you must wait 12 hours between extended rests. You regain all hit points and healing surges. Now, remember, healing surges in fourth edition was the gate which sort of slowed healing down. You could only uh, spend the healing surges at certain points, and once you were out of healing surges, you could not heal anymore
Yeah.
except in very rare circumstances.
And the amount of them was pretty high, so it wasn't
Yeah.
usually a problem, but it was nice because it was a tool where when you wanted to do that sort of deep dungeon exploration or very difficult series of combats one after the other, every time, even in combat, when that leader is healing you, hey, spend a healing surge and get, 10 hit points. Cool. If you have healing surges available. And if you start to run out, then that's where everybody started blinking and going, hey, this is really
Yeah.
hard. What do we do? Hmm.
Yep. And this made sense because they also added a short rest mechanic where a short rest was only 5 minutes long. You renewed all your encounter powers,
Hmm.
and you could spend as many healing surges as you wanted while you were doing a short rest. And this goes along with this sort of, dare I say, resource management
Yes.
at its height, I would say,
Yeah.
where you had your at will powers, you had your encounter powers. So after each encounter, you really wanted to take that 5 minute rest, heal up, and it sort of set, as much as any edition ever has, set that cadence for what they expected an adventuring day to look like.
Hmm.
You have these discrete blocks. You can spend these healing surges, but you only have a certain amount of these healing surges, a certain number of these healing surges, and then you had to take a rest.
And it's just, remark on just 5 minutes, right? We're talking about
Yeah.
just that you can just, right? So really what it was that every encounter you had your encounter powers, because you could assume 5 minutes was possible. But that also gave you a tool as GM, as storyteller, to say, no, you've got to run from this room to the next, right? You got to keep,
Yep.
the poison gases in this in the dungeon, as Tom Lacan famously did, or some other reason why. No, you can't just regain your encounter power, and then the game
Right.
could actually really change, which was a neat tool, right? If you wanted to have that pressure, and people would take it so for granted that you'd get your encounters back, that if they didn't, it was like, oh, edge of your
Mm-hmm.
seat time, right? Like, okay, all
Right.
right, now we're really resource managing big time because the scenario has alerted us to this special condition.
Yeah. So fourth edition introduced this short rest mechanic, which when we get to 2014 carries over,
Hmm.
along with not healing surges, but the use of hit dice as healing surges.
Yeah.
Uh, and so you can see that then just in this one instance, how all of the previous editions sort of built on
Yeah.
the perceived flaws or sort of nuanced
Mm-hmm.
play of previous editions, either to fix it or to reinforce it,
Yeah.
until we got to this amalgam of all of them, which is 2014. And I'm going to go right to 2024 because
Yeah.
2014 is very, very similar to 2024. We'll clarify, we'll note where there are exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
So we now have the extension of this long rest. A long rest is a period of extended downtime, at least 8 hours, available to any creature. Here's where we get into
Yeah.
very specific clarifications of what these terms mean. Because in 2014, it would say things like, okay, you sleep for 8 hours and you can't do strenuous activity. And of course, the question is, what's strenuous activity? What does that count as? So they very specifically lay out in 2024, during a long rest, you must sleep for 6 hours and perform no more than 2 hours of light activity, such as reading, talking, eating, or standing watch. And then they give us some pretty specific bullets. During sleep, you have the unconscious condition. After you finish a long rest, you must wait at least 16 hours before starting another one. So no more, wake up, have a
Right.
tough encounter, take another long rest.
Yeah.
What are the benefits of a long rest? You have to have at least one hit point to start a long rest. And then when you finish the rest, you gain the following. You regain all your hit points and all spent hit point dice. This is
Mm.
different than 2014, where you regained half of your maximum hit point dice. Uh,
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that later. That I just putting a pin in that because that fascinated me when I first saw it.
okay. Ability scores are restored to normal if they had been reduced. Your
Mm-hmm.
exhaustion level is reduced by 1. Any special features that recharge on a long rest are recharged. And how is a long rest interrupted? Again, this is new in its clarification. If you roll initiative for any reason, a long rest is interrupted. If you cast a spell other than a cantrip, the rest is interrupted. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Taking any damage will interrupt the long rest, and an hour of walking or physical exertion. So no, even walking for an hour is no resting there or physical exertion.
Yeah.
If your rest is interrupted after an hour, you can gain the benefits of a short rest, but not a long rest. And you can restart a long rest after an interruption, but you have to add an hour to the time needed to finish that rest. So if you get in 7 hours of a rest and you're interrupted, you don't have to go back and do a full 8 hours. You just have to have an additional hour of rest to make up that difference.
And that's good because if you have a fight in the middle of the night, right? You don't
Yeah.
want to say, and now start over your. But
Mhm.
it's interesting they decide to add that hour. I mean that's a new thing, that idea
Yeah.
that like interruption equals and an extra hour. So if time is brief, maybe that messes you up somehow, and you actually
Mhm.
can't deal with the rest. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
strange addition. I don't know that it needed to be there. It's like a sudden attempt at realism, but okay.
Yeah. I think probably there were just so many questions
Yeah,
that they
yeah,
got that, and we don't often talk about, but we must acknowledge customer service. People call the
mm,
Wizards of the Coast customer service line and ask Magic and D&D
indeed.
questions all the time. And those questions are often either answered if it's a cut and dry answer, or elevated to the design team if it's something that is
Yeah.
a little more complicated. And so, they may get these questions all the time. And now they're like, okay, here's our chance to say, this is what happens with an interruption.
Something I miss, just because listeners may not know this, but in fourth edition, this was really like they did a lot of this. And in fact, there were a couple times that designers took the phone lines.
Mhm.
And I remember there was a particular day where it was like, call in, speak to the designers. And I called in with a question about my crossbow rogue, and Greg Bilsland I think he had said something on the internet or something. So I was like, "Is Greg there to give me his opinion?" And they're like, "Greg doesn't like your rogue using a crossbow. They don't think that should work. He doesn't like it. Is allowed, but he doesn't like it." And I remember just laughing like, "Oh, Greg doesn't like my ability." But
Yeah.
like that. I liked that there was that interaction back then to that level. I don't know to what level it exists today, but yeah, for sure, feedback makes its way, and they see these things.
And now short rest is a 1 hour period of downtime, which a creature tempting can do nothing more strenuous than reading, talking, eating, or standing watch. You have to have at least 1 hit point to start a short rest. The benefits are you could spend hit point dice. They're not called hit dice now, they're called
Yeah.
hit point dice. You can roll as many as you want, one at a time, adding your constitution modifier to each roll. Uh, you can any special features that recharge on a short rest are recharged at the end of that short rest. They're interrupted. Short rests are, again, by rolling initiative, casting a spell other than a cantrip, or taking any damage. And an interrupted short rest confers no benefit. So you have to restart that short rest and do a full hour. Uh, the one thing I've noticed in the rules around short rests are we're getting a lot of things that refresh all at the end of a long rest
Hmm.
or one instance of this ability at the end of a short rest, which I
Yeah.
thought was an interesting compromise. And the game designer in me went, okay, cool, but now you have to be very careful about what you let recharge on a short rest
Yeah.
because you could get into that loop of, oh, I can recharge this on a short rest, so I get one every time, and I can use that one instance of this ability to regain a spell slot. And with that spell slot, I can cast heal. So now, basically, on a short rest, everyone is
Yeah.
healed. So do we ever really have to take a long rest? And I don't know if enough designers think all the way through that process.
I mean, there was clearly a bit of a change in that we saw like Tasha's and those Unearthed Arcanas around then would really heavily lean into all subclass features started becoming not short rests, but per day. And it
Yeah.
almost felt like the short rest was disappearing, which begged the question, what about those classes that really use them? And so we
Mhm.
thought, maybe in 2024, we're just going to see that all vanish, right?
Mhm.
Monk, Warlock, whatever, like forget it. Nothing's going to say short rest. But no, some things still do. There are fewer, but it's still
Mhm.
there. And I think it is a bit awkward still. Like it's a bit
Yeah.
awkward where some classes you want to raise your hand and say, hey, everybody, can we take a short rest? And lots of other classes or subclasses will say, no, why would I? Like, what? Let's keep
Right.
going. Why would we take an hour? And I
Right.
I thought this, the change. It used to be like 10 minutes and 30 minutes in the 2014 playtest packets. And then at the
Mhm.
very end, I know it happened right before Vault of the Dracolich came out because we had to talk about it with the DMs. It changed to an hour in that very last packet. And that still to me feels too long
Mhm.
for that kind of cadence impact. It makes it's hard to fit an hour break into the story of a lot of dungeons or other places where you may want to rest. It's like if you can
Right.
fit an hour, you can probably fit an 8, right? If you
Right.
can hide for an hour, you can hide for 8 kind of thing. And you've got a good enough
Yeah.
hidey hole that's gonna, but 20, 30, that's a little easier to explain that, yeah, maybe you could hide out behind the crates and sort of heal, something like that,
Yeah.
but not an hour. And anyway, it seems like a strange thing that they stuck with it, and that they stuck with this
Mhm.
sort of in between state of many encounter things are gone that would refresh, or many features are gone that would refresh with a short rest, but not all.
Yeah.
And to me, all of this, and this ties into my previous pin about hit dice regaining all of them with a long rest. There are fewer options here for the DM to apply pressure.
Mhm.
So one of the things that would happen is if you wanted to run like a long sequence of, say, going through a challenging jungle and things are coming at you often, right? And you're resting, you're getting half your hit dice back. Well, only half. And then the next day is tough. And now you get half back, right? This creates pressure. And it was a tool you could choose to use, but you could also say nothing happens the next day, and then eventually you got enough of your hit dice back that you're fine.
Mhm.
Now that option isn't really there, right? All pressure must be applied in a single day, or you're getting it all back. Same thing with ability scores, right? There were these questions of what happens with an intellect devour or any number of things, and there were a lot of like, I don't know, I guess it's this. And now it's clarified that if that shadow took all your strength away, you take that long rest and it all comes back, and that erodes those possibilities for pressure. It's not all bad, but it just creates, I think, fewer options for a DM and for the creation of a campaign, things like that.
Yeah, it it does it muddles cadence,
Mm-hmm.
or it tells the game master that you better make a bunch of big explosive encounters,
Yeah.
because if you try to take this story longer, uh it's going to just be, oh, we're back, we're full. There's no, as you said, right?
Yeah.
There's no long-term worry about resources.
Yeah. And then what it says to me is, yeah, if there is no long term erosion and pressure, then it's all really on the encounter, right?
Mhm.
Or the
Yep.
day's encounters. And that has been hard for DMs with 2014. It's not been terrible. It's certainly very, very playable. Very, fifth edition is
Yep.
doing just fine. But it is hard. It's something that DMs complain about, right? I don't know how to challenge my players, and that means this become the only way is that you must learn how to, if you want the challenge, and the challenge would be fun, you must learn how to do it within the day.
So that was our look at short rest, long rest, and natural healing in 2024 and back. So let's talk Greyhawk Gazetteer. Let's go through this Gazetteer of the Fleneus. We have been storming our way across all of Oerth via the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. We are now up to the Rovers of the Barrens. This group of Flan riders, known as Arapahi in their language, fight for survival against Ayus. Their lands border the Bandit Kingdoms to the north and east of Ayus. And there's a lot of Native American parallels given in this particular section. What do you have here, Teos?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to sort of work through this. It feels like it's kind of unnecessarily trying to bring in, look, they're Native Americans, and basically everybody has fought against them and tried to take over their territory at great cost, and they're sort of on the last legs. And to me, this all just feels tragic in a real world context. And the only thing we get, thankfully, is a bit of hope at the end, though in a kind of strange way, in that a former servant of Ayu's named Tang the Horrific, whew, no one likes that drink, escaped Ayu's and gathered rovers to attack Ayuzite forces. Tang dies in this attack on the Stonehold, but they are able to get a bunch of horses, and they're victorious. They burn down the Stonehold place they attack. They for the first time sort of have hope against Ayus. And they're now negotiating an alliance with the wolf nomads. And thinking about the potential of this zone, right? It's got plenty of issues, but what there is here is the kernel of hope against evil. I mean, all of Greyhawk, right? We said this again. It's always a powder keg. It's always something that's, on a fulcrum and, could swing anyway. This is a nation that struggled. It's been beaten by oppressors. And now this is where an alliance, heroes, that could all be pivotal towards turning it around. That could make for a fun campaign if you framed it in the right way.
Yeah, and that's what I'm starting to see in these different regions
Mm-hmm.
is the question of what would a campaign here look like,
Yeah.
a full like 1 to 12 or whatever
Yeah.
campaign, versus what stories could I tell here with the characters being not from this area, but coming into the area to deal with a specific issue. What sort of fun, flavorful things could I do with the story that we're going to tell there?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the answer is both. Sometimes it would be great to do either. And sometimes it would be good for a nice little light touch here. And then sometimes it's like, I don't want anything to do with
Right.
this in any form, shape, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And depending on how hard you want to lean into a campaign in this area, the rules themselves need to support that.
Mm-hmm.
Because the
Mm-hmm.
rules, while malleable, obviously, sort of are pushing your games toward a more medieval fantasy,
Yeah.
European-y feel.
Yep.
And so to fully do that, I would want like a source book. I would want the rules that go along with that.
Yeah.
Uh, so it tends for me to toward that just visit and then leave.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting you mentioned that, given the next region of the Scarlet Brotherhood.
Right.
This the whole book, right? This we said this at the beginning. This book is said to be kind of rumors and widely known information. Potentially some of it could be wrong. And they lean into it in this section because we don't even exactly know what the capital is like or exactly where it
Yeah.
is in this area. And so things like the father of obedience who leads the whole Scarlet Brotherhood, we don't get their class and level, right? It's a
Right.
mystery, Shawn.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm the GM. What do you mean it's a mystery? It's a mystery.
Yeah. And there are some times when I wish they would do that,
Mm-hmm.
but the Scarlet Brotherhood could be the thing that the characters are fighting for the entire campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And even the monks, right? The Scarlet Brotherhood are made up of these monks for the most part.
Yeah.
The whole tradition of the monk going all the way back to first edition in D&D at least is there's a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only one at the top of this
Yeah.
pyramid, and there are two below that, and there might be four below that, etc. So as you gain levels, you need to actually fight, or one of the ones above you have to die in
Mm-hmm.
order for you to move up and take that. So there's this idea baked into D&D, Monkhood, Scarlet Brotherhood, all of that
Yeah.
begged you to fight it, that begged
Yeah.
you to know. And then it says, well,
It's a mystery. No one
it's a
knows.
mystery. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else do we know about the Scarlet Brotherhood?
So they control this vast Tilvanat Peninsula, which is in the south, and it's hidden by the vast swamp, which they, I guess, sort of also quasi control. And then they have a large island that they control. And the capital is somewhere in this peninsula. The Brotherhood also travels daily. They send ships to Hipmonaland, which is a sort of South American South American slash African sounding place, jungle, forbidden lands, lost lands, all for reasons unknown, we're told. And the idea was that back before the Greyhawk Wars, the vast swamp meant nobody wanted to go in there. And so you just felt like, oh yeah, whatever we've seen from spending a few travelers, oh, they look like farmers and traders. But boy, they sure grow a lot of food. And then the spies start finding out, well, it looks like maybe they worship Tharizdun, the great destroyer, though it seems like that's just some of them in this sect called the Black Brotherhood. And really what happens is that when during the Greyhawk Wars they emerge and suddenly, as we talked about, go through this enormous assassination attacks on various nations and turn everything around. We'll have an example of that later. That's when fear and paranoia, they become like one of the main worries other than Ayus here. And they in fact in the entry they say, the only thing that has more enemies than the Scarlet Brotherhood is Ayus, right? Like, or maybe is it the other way around? Yeah, only Ayus can count more enemies than the Scarlet Brotherhood. And
Right.
they have a credible wealth and resources, we hear. And while some nations have made gaids recently, the idea is that they may be stronger than ever before, especially because this paranoia and fear, nobody knows who to trust because somebody within your own government may be secretly a member of the Scarlet Brotherhood. To which I say, stop hiring so many Caucasian people. Anyway, uh,
Yeah, exactly.
I know a
I
way
still,
to
if you
save
have
you.
blonde hair, if you have blonde hair in the living Greyhawk
Maybe
or in the
scan them with
Greyhawk,
magic. I don't know. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Um, and thinking about potential, this is one of these places. It's like a setting backdropy thing because
Mhm.
you can't just set a campaign in here with what they've given you. I mean, you can, but you'd have to make it all up. There's
Right.
nothing here to be used. In fact, even to apply what's here to the rest of the campaign, nothing here is given. Now, there is a whole other second edition book on the Scarlet Brotherhood,
Right.
but it's very hard to use this, right? We're just when you're told there are secrets, but not what they are. That's the opposite
Yeah.
of what a DM wants, I think.
Yeah.
Get some
So speaking of Scarlet Brotherhood, we'll go to the Sea Barrens. These are islands off the former Great Kingdom's eastern coast. So we've spent a lot of time over there with like the Solnar Compact and other islands over there, the Lendor Islands. So there are five major islands, one called the Serpent Isles, that being uninhabited and maybe be cursed. The other four inhabited ones are ruled by former Aird lords that are now independent of the
Great Kingdom.
monarchies on the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's, as you might expect, warm, mild climates in the ocean, abundant resources, lots of trade, shipyards and ports, temples to the sea god Procan, uh, as one might expect. What else do we have here in the Isles?
Yeah, they joined the Solnar Compact as a way to oppose the Scarlet Brotherhood and the Lordship of the Isles, who are under the control of the Scarlet Brotherhood. But it's not out of friendship; it's out of fear of the Brotherhood. But I think there's some interesting potential here. Like this could be a place where you could say, all right, if I want like a seagoing type campaign, I could have some fun here with these like uh, what is this cursed island about? Could that maybe be pivotal to uh, the turning, fighting off our enemies and thwarting the
Mhm.
Scarlet Brotherhood? Maybe it ties into the past of this island. Of course, this was originally Flan. So maybe the whatever's ancient there is Flan in origin. That could be interesting. And maybe you could find a reason for an actual alliance, right? You're doing this to be self-serving, but maybe a reason to convince as heroes that your Sea Barons should join the larger efforts globally. That could be a cool part of a campaign.
Yeah, I love that idea of that fifth island. Uh,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see like Indiana Jones vibes, right? There's all this
Yes.
stuff there. No one's been there, but we have to go. So the Nazis are going there, and we have to go there,
Yes.
and we fight them, and we fight whatever the curse is, and we try to
Yeah.
harness
Love
this
it.
power. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. That's great. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we've got the Sea Barons, so of course we have to have the Sea Princes. The Sea
Yeah.
Princes, though, are nowhere near the Sea Barons. The Sea Princes are south of Keoland, east of the Hell Furnace Mountains, the Azure Sea, and the Jerlia Bay to the east and the southeast.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a nation. Uh, it's basically pirate land. Uh,
Yeah.
they fought Keoland. They're slave traders. They may or may not be involved with the Scarlet Brotherhood, depending on what you think or how you want to run it. Uh, the history goes into the noble houses and warring with each other and Scarlet Brotherhood infiltration, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, in one night, the Scarlet Brotherhood takes out 27 out of 30 of the key nobles ruling the Sea Princes, right? So then
Yeah.
half the country, even though they have like rebellions and back and forth, half the country is owned by the Scarlet Brotherhood or controlled by it. And
Mhm.
and then Keelan gets involved.
Yeah. Well, Keeland always gets involved with things around them. So Keeland took advantage of this, attacking and taking the city of Westkeep. Ex-captives, particularly the Olman there, now control the western half of the nation, but the Brotherhood holds the other key settlements. And then you have merfolk and Tritons attacking the Scarlet Brotherhood ships. In a sometimes in an alliance with others and sometimes just
Yeah.
of their own accord. what sort of potential do you see here for adventure in the
It's such a
Secret
perfect
Society?
example of a Greyhawk nation, right? And in fact, there is even a revolt within or infighting within the Scarlet Brotherhood as this Black Brotherhood that follows Therisden led an armed revolt that started the chaos that Keelan took advantage of. And this was after discovering an ancient temple in the hell furnaces near the Sea of Dust. And so it's just one of these great, again, it's a powder keg. It's a thing that's, it's not, this is, there's no stability here whatsoever, and anything could chuck it one way or the other, right? So DM rich territory here. You could say like, well, let's go with the Black Brotherhood and what they were finding in the Sea of Dust and why this led to revolt, and let's, kind of like what you're talking about in the previous region. Or maybe we're from Keeland and how do we hold on to this city we have and expand? Or I want to have an ocean going thing and lean into this whole pirate business. So how do I get the Sea Princes back on our side and an alliance with the Merfolk and the Tritons? And what secrets are there under the water that could be there? And, lost pirate, whatever. I mean, there's just so much that could happen. This actually could be a really fun, dump all that old slavery stuff and just focus on the piratey, undersea ancient, and it has everything, right? I mean, you've got deserts in the Sea of Dust, hell furnace mountains, the ocean, I mean, swamps, yeah, everything here. Could be a really fun campaign.
Everything a young DM would want to put a campaign together.
Yeah.
So we'll go from the lands of the sea to the lands of the shield. The shield lands were once an organized and prosperous land, the best roads in all the Flaneus, but war with Ayus has devastated this area.
Yeah, and I'm holding up a piece of art that shows like a broken statue and shields on the ground, and just war-torn landscape devastation.
Yeah. So half the lands are still held by Ayus, including the island city of Admanfort in the Near Div. The lands are home to orders of knights who sort of see themselves as the bulwark against evil. What else do we have here in the Shield Lands?
So, yeah, I mean, this feels like one of these places that's kind of backdroppy. It does have some potential, but a lot of it is like, this is the land that has always stood up and been this bulwark against evil. And it's been going for some time. In fact, there was a local warlord named Halmadar the Cruel. And what did he find? The artifacts known as the Hand and Eye of Vecna. And he conquered a whole bunch of territory before his former subjects, bury him alive in the Kron Hills. And in fact, I think it was Vecna Lives takes us maybe back to even getting that from the Hand and Eye from the Kron Hills. The Shield lands faces off against the Horn Society, then Ayus. Lady Katarina is preparing the knights to retake their lost land. So if you love that kind of mass warfare, and the idea that there are going to be these huge military campaigns to retake lost land, and what could heroes do to act as strike teams and take, like the Near Div is a really cool ocean, a lake in the center of this place with Admin Fort on an island. You could uncover powerful artifacts and secrets in either the Near Div or the Kron Hills, take out key enemies and keeps and dungeons. There's a lot that could happen here if we want to lean into that kind of backdrop of war. It's not my kind of campaign, but there certainly is that potential there. And if the Shield lands could do well, everybody around that region would be better off against Ayus, right? So it's a fulcrum point for the larger area around it. It borders Furiandi and the Bandit Kingdoms, and so there's a lot that can happen that would strengthen everything if somehow the Shield lands could make gains against Ayus.
I think that's a great point. If your campaign is going to be the war against Ayus, you can start at those fringes and start with the small skirmishes and the small battles, and then move your way closer and closer. And the Shield lands would be, in the middle of this campaign. The middle levels would be there before you actually go up into the land of Ayus. But if you do run that campaign, as we've shown, you have a ton of options for lands to use to host this campaign.
And I never really went to the Shieldlands. It's Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota that played there, so I don't really know their storylines. Interestingly, the Sea Barons were Italy, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other areas I think weren't represented that we talked about. Interesting.
No, definitely not. Cool. Well, that is our tour for the day. But next time we will come back and talk about some barbarians and some stoneholds and some tiger nomads. So thank you everyone for listening. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. We want to thank the people who support our Patreon. So for our Master of Dungeon supporters, thank you so much. Our Master of Realm supporters, they get a shout out in our show notes. I'm looking at that wonderful list right now. And for our Masters of the Multiverse, well, while Teos does the tango with his Lego minifigs, I'm going to read your names. Walt Winfrey, Chris Webster, Javier Waziak, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Graham Ward, James Walton, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, Joe Tyler, Trace, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Josh and Lawanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Krishna Samosa, Andy Shockney, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Runner Rick, Ozymandias Rex, Pugness, Vladimir Printer from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Mighty Zeus, Tom Nelson, the Deck of Player Safety, Falcon Neal, Shawn Mowley, John Mickey, Trey McLemore, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Eric Mengi, the Mathemagician, Paul Mata, Chad Lynch, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover. I'm having trouble today. Brian King, the Mighty Jared, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, James Fisher, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon.com, Will Doyle, Evil John, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Dave Bastiensen, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, and Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you for your support. We could really use your support as well, and you can give it by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. If you can't do that, we understand, but you could also help us by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or any other places where you listen to the podcast. A 5-star review would be a big help. You can also go to us on YouTube and like and subscribe and do all that stuff, and you can see Teos' dance and see him holding up lots of minifigs this episode. Teos, where can people find you and your stuff?
Ooh, find me at alphastream.org. Work has been completely busy, but boy, do I have ideas. Someday in the future. Lots of new stuff coming.
I have no ideas, but work has been busy, and you can find me on all the socials at Shawn Merwin. On some of them, I'm doing a tip of the day for TTRPG writing, so check those out on all the places. Whew. We have done a lot today. What are we going to do now?
Well, not to make things emotional, but I'm going to spend all the time I can with my son before taking him off to college this week.
Very exciting, touching. I hope you have a great time.
Thanks.
I am going to be thankful I don't have to do that anymore.